Rocky Mountain first introduced their Powerplay e-mountain bike lineup back in 2018. A lot has changed in the EMTB world since then, and we are very excited to see that the new Rocky Mountain Powerplay line has kept up with the times, making some notable improvements from motor to suspension kinematics to some much needed updates in the geometry, and we're going to touch on a lot of that today, as well as bring you into a little interview we had with Ken Paris from Rocky Mountain, where we asked him a few questions specifically about some experiences we had on last generations of the Rocky Mountain Powerplay e-bikes, and if any of the issues that we had and some other riders have noticed were addressed, as well as ensuring that some of our favorite features carried over into this new bike. Appreciate you taking a few and chatting a bit on the new Powerplay bike. Looks like a couple of really cool upgrades from motor upgrade to battery size, suspension.
Essentially, the geometry updates that we did to our standard platforms and Altitude and Instinct, we implemented those in the Powerplay chassis as well. So all the bikes received longer reaches, steeper seat tube angles, slacker head tube angles, lower bottom brackets, chainstays. Size appropriately for the chassis, so pretty much in all cases longer. And then we also added multiple chainstay positions. So I would say it wasn't even just like small changes; it was a fairly extensive overhaul.
So here beside me is the Rocky Mountain Altitude C70 model. The Altitude is their 170, 160 millimeter 29er. The Instinct has a little bit less travel for those who don't quite need this much and want to focus on a little bit more trail, kind of all mountainy riding. Now, what is very neat about the Powerplay lineup is the modularity of this rear end. Riders can swap out that rear link and can actually decrease or increase the travel depending on which model bike they have. So essentially, if you've got one bike and you want to have a second shock and possibly a different air spring to up or down travel that fork, you can take this bike from 160 to 150 or vice versa and really have two bikes in one depending on where you're going on a trip or what your local terrain dictates. Now, obviously, one of the most unique things about Rocky Mountain's Powerplay bike lineup sits below that linkage, and that is the Dynami motor system. This is Dynami 4.0, and wow, there is a lot of new stuff going on inside that unit. One of the questions that we asked you in the email and you responded to was what you guys did well with Dynami 3 and what you were seeking to improve in 4. And I know just from all the e-bikes we've tested, kind of a common takeaway that our riders always had was that your bikes felt like a rock crawler. Like it wasn't necessarily like you would kind of soft pedal and it would just launch or take off like some, but if you would just pedal, you could just climb up the gnarliest, the steepest stuff because I think you've got like the highest torque numbers, right? And the way that the power comes on is just so slow, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but just so predictable and mellow that it kind of matches more like a human element than an artificial element. And it looks like you guys maybe even made that better, or I should say even more tuning into that.
So I'd say the most consistent piece of feedback that we had from our Dynami 3 system, there was two main things. Was the motor itself was quite powerful, especially compared to the competition. That was intentional, but all that power is sort of pointless if you can't control it. We did quite a bit of tuning to our programming to make sure that the power delivery was quite smooth. We feature a mechanical torque arm in our system that sits outside of the motor casing and in the chain path. Something that anyone can see when they pull off the motor cover and they can kind of get an idea of how it works. But that mechanical system ends up being quite a bit more sensitive and produces sort of a higher resolution torque profile. That's really, to put it simply, the magic in our system. And we made sure that we carried that over from the old system to the new one. Obviously with some fine tuning in the materials that we're using and then the programming as well. doing small improvements to other parts of the system, such as we tripled the number of magnets in the rear wheel, so that our readout on wheel speed is also has quite a bit higher resolution.
Our test riders and our experiences in the past have all said that the Rocky climbs and rides unlike any other e-bike in the category which is the class 1 category that we've tested. It has a very like rock crawler, just infinite traction feel that was something that a lot of testers enjoyed. And in talking with Ken, we found that a lot of Rocky Mountain fans, dealers, distributors also really enjoyed the power and the way in that power was delivered. Now, that doesn't mean the system was perfect. There were a lot of issues with it, mostly in terms of drag, in terms of noise, vibration that could be felt through the bike. These are all things that we addressed in our review, and you could probably find in other reviews as well. Or if you owned one of the previous generation bikes, you likely noticed yourself.
You can fine-tune the power output as well by going through the menu in the screen that we have integrated in the top tube to choose sort of what sort of power profile you'd like to have. So it's not necessarily just change your power settings. Like most brands have like an eco mode to like a trail mode, and then our most powerful mode, we call it ludicrous mode. We have the ability in our system actually to fine-tune that, so you can change the torque profile and the mapping of the system.
Okay, and it'll save it for the duration until you change it back, I guess, for a different ride or a different destination. Some of the important factors were that 108 Newton meters of torque. That is a massive amount of power. Obviously, this bike cuts out at 20 miles an hour, just like all other Class 1 e-bikes, but it feels so much faster than all the other e-bikes that we've tested. And granted, this is not our long-term review, and these videos are intended to be more about the tech and the facts, but the fact is that this bike somehow feels so much faster. But without going too far into the uncertainties so far, we have the chainstay in the short position right now. You do have 10 millimeters of adjustment by going into the long or short position, and then obviously your micro adjustments in the Ride 4. We have felt that the rear end feels a bit long with that 439 to 437 chainstay. It's not, it doesn't scream we're way too long. So we're thinking possibly with that mid-high pivot and that kind of rearward wheel path as the suspension's compressing, we could be feeling a little bit of issues there, but some circumstances out on the trail, we'll have a little bit of a hard time just getting that back end to snap around or pushing that bike where we want it, just leaving a little bit of kind of awkwardness out on the trail. So we obviously got to spend a lot more time on it. As you can tell by how clean it is, we've not put a ton of miles on this thing just yet because we wanted to get this video out to you guys and answer some of the burning questions you have about it. Again, changes in the mountain bike side of things, we mostly addressed here. Geometry, anti-squat has been increased, suspension kinematics have changed, just as brands like Rocky have learned. E-bikes, they're just experiencing such a different load on suspension, the platform, the support you need, the progressivity towards the end of the stroke. There have definitely been some changes made, and I will say that we've appreciated and noticed those differences out on the trail. So chances are most of you riders will as well, because they've definitely been pretty big and pretty easy to spot. One last thing that we forgot to talk about on the electronic side before we moved into the mountain bike side of things is the new Jumbotron display up here on the top tube. It is very cool. The smooth integration of it, how it sits in the top tube, how easy it is to read, all very, very cool. It would be rad if it was in color. I don't know if that really makes that big of a difference or if it's something to complain about, but it would be really neat if it was. There's a really cool little controller on the handlebar there near the dropper post. You can toggle through each setting from the ludicrous mode, which is their most powerful mode, all the way down to kind of that eco mode. Really, you can do a lot of fine tuning, not even through an app, just right here on the handlebar controller, and by looking at the numbers change on the screen here. The Jumbotron is very cool, easy to use, and I think that Rocky Mountain has done a really good job of making something that's easy to customize, control, and view while you're out riding. So in a nutshell, that is the Rocky Mountain Altitude Powerplay. Again, there are a number of models available from $5,749 on up into the $10,000 mark. This model here, which is the Carbon C70, retails for $9,059, weighs in at about 53 pounds for our size large. Definitely notable improvements to be made. This bike is a lot more fun. It is a lot better equipped to handle the terrain and trails that we like to ride. Suspension's great. You still have that amazing power. We did ask some people out on our one of our ride days in an Instagram video if they had any questions, things they really wanted to know about that bike. One of which is 108 Newton meters of torque rideable. Is it too much power? I'm guessing that person's not a gearhead or a motor fan, because is there such a thing as too much power? Yes, there is, I know. Traction, right? You gotta have traction. Without power, it's useless. But 108 Newton meters, absolutely rideable. You can tune it down if you don't want it. You can put it in a lower mode. You can put the the speed at which it engages down. But so far, we haven't found an instance yet where that 108 Newton meters is not rideable. We love it. We are intentionally going into sections as slow as possible and just trying to wait until the last possible minute and then standing on the pedals and just watching it accelerate and grab up just gnarly terrain. Very cool. Motor noise, the grinding sound, coffee maker sound improvement. We had touched on that, absolutely. Bike has its own unique sound, but it is definitely a lot quieter and a lot smoother feeling. So thank you guys very much for asking those questions down below. Of course, we're going to continue riding this bike all the way until our 2022 e-bike shootout. Who is pumped? I know that we are very excited on that. We're going to have some news on where we're going to be doing it this year. And we listened to you. It's not going to be in the desert, okay? We're going to hopefully not get rained out, but we're going to have some fun in the woods. If you've got any questions on this bike, please reach out and ask us. One last thing, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We would greatly appreciate it. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you out on the trails.